So we're finally starting to talk about, in this video series, specific communication theories. We've come down from very meta-theoretical discussions about theories as a hypothesis, lens, and stance. So we talked about implicit and explicit theories, and now we're speaking about, and then we spoke about the traditions of communication research. And those are all meta-theoretical discussions because we're above those individual theories, looking at more general patterns, comparing and contrasting, and talking about overall areas of research. Now in this chapter we get down to very specific theories, and in fact we're starting as narrowly as possible. We're talking about the communicator. A friend of mine tries to make it sound fancier than this and pronounces it the communicator, which is a very academic way to describe it. And essentially this is the most personal, one of the most personal chapters, in that you might be able to see yourself starting now and moving forward in the semester. You might be able to see yourself more in these particular theories. So we're going to look through a whole bunch of them, and before we do, however, we're going to do a little bit of background on why they fall into different categories or different traditions of research. So one of the things that each tradition of research has are called ontological assumptions. They all assume a different view of what the communicator is, or a different view of what the person is. And each of these areas makes assumptions about the nature of human beings and about our existence in the world. For example, ontological assumptions about who we are range like this. Did we come from nature, or is nurture the main thing that formed us? In other words, are we born this way essentially, or are we shaped through nurturing this way? So nature is like your DNA, and essentially a code that's imprinted on you, and you're just, that's it. Or were you raised a certain way, you were nurtured a certain way, and that's what made you the way you are. And people have different viewpoints on this, and you're going to see some of this coming out in the different theories of the communicator that we'll look at. Do we have free will, or is fate really what is guiding us? And some people call this free will versus predestination, so or destiny. Do you really make choices? Are your choices real, or is it just kind of you were going to choose that basically anyway and your fate is already determined? That's a big question that people ask, and we're not here to answer these questions, by the way, today. We're here to raise them because these are the kinds of questions that are assumed, kind of issues that are assumed within each of the theories that we're going to look at. That's why we're talking about ontological assumptions. They might not state them directly. Some theories do state them directly, but others don't. Are we here for a purpose, or are we here by chance? That's a kind of version of the questions above it, but you often hear people wonder that in those private conversations they might have with one another. It's like, you know, do you think we're all connected, and what's really going on here? And so you know, we want to know, is there more to this than just random chance? And fourth, are we the product of communication, or are we the producers of original communication? In other words, do we really have our own thoughts? Are we the producers of what we say, or are we just the product, the result of all the things that we've been exposed to over the years, and we're, you know, we're the accumulation of all the different books we've read and conversations we've had and TV shows that we've watched, and there's really nothing original coming from us. So there's 4 different kinds of questions, and there are many others, but these are the 4 that are probably the most prominent for our purposes this semester. And those are ontological assumptions, assumptions about what makes us tick, who we are, why we are the way we are. And they undergird, or they are assumed parts of the different theories we'll look at. And the 2 dominant views of the communicator are the socio-psychological tradition, which is really associated with a trait view of what it means to be a person, and the sociocultural tradition, which defines the individual person as a self. And I put that in quotations because it's kind of a funny word, self. And these are really the main traditions we're going to look at in terms of the communicator. There are other possibilities, but these are the main ones that we'll look at in this lecture. So let's start with the socio-psychological view of what it means to be a person, what it means to be a communicator. And we'll look at those communication theories that all go under this area. And now these traditions are a little bit like categories or buckets that you can sort things into. This is not lens, hypothesis, and stance. These traditions, you'll see now that we're looking at specific theories, tend to have the same types of theories and research underneath them. So you're going to see some similarities within these traditions. The first area is trait theory in general. And that trait theory is a very powerful one that we mostly don't talk about in your everyday communication classes. But in the socio-psychological tradition, many people believe very strongly in traits, and that is our predispositions of temperament are rooted in our DNA, in our brain structure. In other words, our personalities, the way we are, how we communicate, how we interact with others, comes from our DNA. It comes from our genetic code. So we are born this way. You are born communicating the way that you do because of your DNA. It's not necessarily something you've learned, or not much of it is learned. Most of it comes from how you were made in the first place. So the way we experience the world is a matter of what is happening in our brains, and that's genetically determined. And this theory argues that our environment and our past learning are not very important regarding how we tend to communicate. They're not saying that it doesn't matter at all. They're just saying that the main way, the primary way we have come to be who we are is because of our traits, our DNA, and those are firm, those are stable over time. So things like shyness, aggressiveness, outgoingness, short fuse, for example, are all influenced much more by our genetics and our brain function than how we are socialized. So maybe you know some people like this that are very shy, and it seems like no matter what happens, you just can't get them out of that shy temperament. And people in this area of research would say, well, that's because they're born shy. There's some people are shy, just like some people are left-handed, and some people are outgoing, just like some people are right-handed. And they say, no, that's just the way it is. And you can learn to write with your opposite hand, but it's going to be it'll go against how you were made. So that's what, when we're talking about a trait, the people in this area are very serious. They're not just saying, oh, it's your personality. They're not throwing the word personality around loosely. They mean a very specific thing. They mean a very specific set of assumptions when they use words like traits and personality and DNA. The next theory of a communicator we'll look at is a specific trait theory. There's a handful of trait theories, and one of the most well-known ones is called argumentativeness, which is a huge word based upon the root of it is argument. In other words, some people are very argumentative, and that is they have a tendency to talk about controversial topics. They like to support their own point of view and refute the opposing points of view. They like to debate. They're very assertive. They state their opinions clearly, and they have an issue-based style of discussion. So whatever issue comes on the table, they like to debate it. And this is, even though the word is argue, we mean this from a communication standpoint. We don't mean to have a shouting match in a fight where it gets really personal with someone. I mean, that's the way we use the word argue in everyday life, but this theory doesn't use the word in that everyday sense. They're talking about you read the newspaper, you see an issue, and you want to debate it with somebody. You want to discuss it and debate it. And that's just a way to engage the world. A lot of people mistake this for verbal aggressiveness, which is a little lower on the slide. It's not the same as verbal aggressiveness. Aggressiveness is where you attack the other person with your words. You might name call them, and how could you say this, and you're immoral, and you're a bad person, and all kinds of name calling and things like that. That's where you're attacking the person. It's not about the issue. And that is usually, that kind of verbal aggressiveness is usually what we normally think of as a fight. You're having a fight with a person, and sometimes they say things that cut very deep. And there's some research that shows that this kind of verbal aggressiveness is sometimes associated with physical aggressiveness and later abuse. So sometimes, let's say you're dating and someone does a lot of name calling. You know, they call you stupid a lot, and maybe they're just joking, right? Sounds like they're just joking. Oh, you're such an idiot. And it sounds playful and fun. Perhaps to some of you, it doesn't sound playful and fun to me, but I've heard people say, oh, we're just clowning around. Oftentimes, those are early indicators that that relationship may lead to some kind of abusive situation down the line. So those are warning signs, they're red flags. And even though you might feel like you should ignore them, oh, I'm sure it's just innocent, it's much better to confront that early. It's much easier to confront the issue when it's name calling and when it's seems playful than when it's real physical or emotional or verbal abuse. So just a little bit of information there about the seriousness of this. So argumentativeness is not the same as verbal aggressiveness, even though the words look almost the same, they sound almost the same, and in our everyday way of thinking about it, they mean the same thing. When we're talking about this trait theory of what it means to be a person, about the communicator, when we're talking about the communicator, argumentativeness is very different than aggressiveness. Aggressiveness tends to be a negative trait, and argumentativeness tends to be actually a positive trait. It shows critical thinking. It often leads to great problem solving, and people that are ready to debate, oftentimes in a positive way, can make very good employees. The next trait theory we'll look at is social anxiety. Sometimes it's called communication apprehension, and essentially it's a tendency to be afraid or anxious about communicating. The abbreviation for communication apprehension, it's very popular. They just call it CA. The people doing this research say, oh, we're doing some CA research. They mean that social anxiety, that communication anxiety, the difficulty that people have communicating across a variety of social settings. So they tend to be nervous. They might get sweaty palms. Their face might turn red or flush. They might feel their heart rate increase. They feel the butterflies in their stomach. That's communication apprehension. That's social anxiety. Maybe they're going to go to a party. They feel it because before they go to a party and they don't want to go. Certainly before they get up and speak in front of an audience, they might feel that. But that's common. And if that's the only thing, as the bullet says, if you get a little nervous before you give a presentation, we might call that stage fright. That's not the same as communication apprehension. Almost everybody gets a little bit nervous before they give a presentation or before they get on some kind of stage, so to speak. And communication apprehension goes across those social settings. Hey, come on over. We're going to have some friends over. The person with communication apprehension might be like, oh no, I'm going to have to talk to people. That's horrible. And they would feel that way maybe even in a meeting at work. I knew someone, for example, that I used to work with that one-on-one, that person was normal and relaxed and composed and everything was fine. And anytime I saw her at work during a meeting, her skin around her neck would turn very red and she would be visibly nervous. And this is only a meeting of about 10 people. And I saw this over and over again and I thought, oh my goodness, she has communication apprehension. This is years ago. But so it's not the same as regular nervousness before you give a presentation. Everybody gets a little bit nervous. And for many people, this anxiety may be a genetic predisposition. In other words, it's a trait. It's part of your enduring personality. And so a lot of times they'll say, well, you have communication apprehension, but you can take public speaking courses and you can get over it. It's true that some people with communication apprehension are able to fake it. In other words, they are able to compensate and learn the skills and look like they are not nervous. But if you ask them, most of them would say, well, even though I'm getting better at it, I still do feel quite nervous. And only about 5%, from what I've heard in the research, only about 5% of people actually have communication apprehension, that kind of actual social anxiety that goes beyond just normal amounts of nervousness. Attribution theory is a fascinating one. You'll notice this when you're dealing with other people. And it studies the way that we infer why people behave the way they do. In other words, we're attributing or guessing about the causes of why they're behaving a certain way. So how do we determine our beliefs about what's making that person act that way? There are two general types of causes. The first one is the individual's dispositions, or in other words, internal causes. The other one is situational or external causes. So let's pretend that someone is late for class, and I'm a teacher in class, and I might, let's pretend for a moment this person is always late, okay? That the student comes in late and they're always late. I might think individual dispositions or an internal cause. I might look at that student that comes in and they're always late, and I might say, oh, they're just late. You know, they don't really care very much about being on time. That's just part of who they are. So I attribute their lateness to something internal to their personality, internal to who they are. A situational cause would sound like this. Let's say a person came into class and they were late. I might attribute it to the bad weather. I might in my mind say, oh, they're late, but look, it's snowing out. Or they're late, but they drive 45 minutes in this commute. So maybe traffic was extra bad this morning. Traffic, weather, maybe there's no parking spots. Those are all external causes. So I'm not tagging the reasons for their behavior directly to their internal personality, their internal values, and their internal elements of what makes them who they are. The fundamental attribution error, sometimes called the fatal attribution error, is where we assume that that other person is behaving the way they are because of something's wrong with them internally, and that's that. So, oh, that person is just a bad person and they always do this, when really there might be other reasons why. So that's considered an attribution error, because if we automatically assign their behavior to their internal causes, their internal motivation, their internal judgment, then we can put them in that box in our heads that just disregards them as a reliable person, as someone who can be trusted, when really there are other kinds of external causes that do affect people. And a lot of times you'll notice this. You might figure, oh, that person's just a jerk or something. You might think of a harsh word that describes their internal causes. And then when you hear a little bit about their lives, a little bit about their situation, you might realize, you might say, oh, I had no idea. Maybe they're late to class routinely, for example, not because they're, just lazy or don't care about being on time, but maybe they're late to class because they have to take care of their younger brothers and sisters in the morning and get them all off to school because they have no parents. Their parents died or something. And I actually know somebody where this is the case, where they're barely an adult themselves, and both their parents are gone, and they're taking care of 3 younger brothers and sisters. And so, yeah, sometimes they're late for things, but it's not because of that they're a bad person or they don't care, they're lazy. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They're incredibly responsible. They have more responsibilities than most people their age. So attribution theory is one of the ways that we mentally assign those kinds of causes to people's behaviors. Social judgment theory is pretty basic, actually, but sometimes people get it confused. And this is where we make judgments about other people's statements based upon our perceptual anchors. So in other words, we hear somebody say something and we either accept it reject it, or we don't really care one way or the other. So our anchors are formed, that starting place for our own opinions, our own perceptions, are based upon past experiences and what we already believe about this topic, you know, how we were raised, where we grew up, things like that. And so depending upon where we sit on that continuum with our current opinions, we're going to have a latitude of acceptance. They make a statement and we might have an area in our minds where we're willing to accept opinions like that. Maybe it's a big area. Hey, we're open to lots of opinions. We might have an area of rejection where if someone goes a little too far with their opinion, well, I can't really accept that. I reject that. You don't necessarily say this out loud, but in your mind, you process it. And then there might be a latitude of non-commitment, and that's where you're not really too concerned about what that person said one way or the other, and there you have possibly different opinions a little bit here or there, but you're not committed to that position. Our judgments about what we accept, reject, and what we're not committed to are often also based upon our ego involvement, or in other words, our personal connection to a topic. So let me give you an example. Let's say somebody is talking about raising taxes in a far away place. Most of us would not really care. We would have very little ego involvement. The ego doesn't mean that you think you're so amazing here. It just means that we don't see ourselves as personally connected to some other community having their taxes raised. So we would have a large area of non-commitment. We would probably have a somewhat large area of acceptance of the diverse opinions, and we probably have a very low area of rejection, because they would have to say something pretty extreme for us to reject it. Now let's bump up our ego involvement. Let's pretend they were going to increase the taxes in our community by 10 times. Now all of a sudden we care because it's coming out of our pocketbook. We're closely involved with the opinions that are being expressed. We're connected to the issues. And so pretty quickly we form our own opinion, our own position on this topic. And when we are very close or highly ego involved with a topic, we're going to have a lower or smaller range or latitude of acceptance, a larger latitude of rejection, and a small area of non-commitment. And so if you think about the issues that are important to you, you'll find that this is true. Take some sports team far away, and then people could be talking about some sports team far away, and you don't really care about that sport or that sports team at all, and low ego involvement, and probably a high latitude, a high area there of non-commitment. Now make it about a local sports team, one that you support and root for. You're going to have formed ideas about what you agree with and what you disagree with, and that shows you there that your personal ego involvement is one of the main determinants that'll shape what you're willing to accept, reject, and what you're not committed to.